On Monday, it was announced that with 47% of the vote, Liz Truss had won the Conservative leadership election. That means she's heading into number 10 at a particularly turbulent time, with sharks already circling and some of Boris's fans already seemingly keen to strike. That means the first days of her premiership will be particularly important. So over the next few months, we're going to be tracking Truss's progress. Every Tuesday and Friday, we'll be reviewing Truss's first 100 days, seeing how she's able to cope with some of Britain's biggest crises in modern British political history. To do that, we put together a list of 9 key promises and policy areas, and we're going to see whether Truss is able to deliver on them. So in today's episode, we'll be going through the first days of her premiership, discussing what's happened so far, as well as telling you what these 9 policies are that we're going to be tracking over the next 100 days. So stay tuned for all of that. Anyway, before we get to those metrics we'll be checking, let's start by discussing Truss's tenure over the last couple of days. And to do that, I'm joined by Zach Michaelis, TLDR's editor-in-chief.
Hello.
And Nelson Fernandez-Cerro, TLDR EU's lead writer.
Hello.
How are you both doing?
Yeah, very, very well. Obviously, I think we should say...
Yes, this is being recorded Thursday at 2 p.m. So if there's any news that emerges after that, whatever that news may be, we're not aware of it at this stage.
Of course.
Which is a weird caveat to make. We're not.
Yeah.
That caveat's always true.
Yeah.
But it's especially prescient.
Sure.
That aside, let's focus on Liz Truss's first week, because this looks to be a momentous week for all kinds of reasons. So, as I said in the intro, Truss was able to win the Conservative leadership race with 81,000 votes, which comes in at 57% of the vote, which is a tighter margin than Johnson versus Hunt last time round. And obviously the previous time, Theresa May, we never got to the final vote.
Yeah.
It's also likely closer than we expected, right?
Yeah.
What are your kind of both thoughts on the initial result when it came out on Monday?
Yep, so not only was this closer than Johnson versus Hunt, this is the closest result under the new leadership scheme.
Yeah.
So I believe it was in 2001 that they changed the system of how it was voted, and this is the closest. And given that the entire momentum in the campaign, from the members at least, was for Truss, seeing it be so close, I think has jolted Truss and her team. And I think it's what's led to her being more loyalist focused, as we'll probably get into. But it's not set her off on the strongest foot if she's only been able to garner 57% of the membership when all the polls put her vastly ahead.
Zach, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Nelson's just said. I mean, the fact that the new Prime Minister doesn't command at least the first preference support of a majority of MPs, and only that of a very slight majority of the membership doesn't bode well for her. And yeah, as Nelson mentioned, it probably plays into her decision to appoint a very loyalist cabinet, which I'm sure we'll get onto in a second. The other thing I think is worth mentioning is just that it's really interesting in retrospect how much the polls framed this race, because all the polls were saying there was this massive lead for Truss, and that clearly had an influence on the way that Sunak campaigned. And you can just imagine the hypothetical. Imagine the polls were saying actually it's 55-45 or 57-43, and you can imagine the campaign would have been very, very different. And this, it's just odd. The media and actually the politicians' incessant focus on what turned out to be very unreliable polls has really skewed how the race panned out. And you can just imagine, actually, I mean, plausibly, if Sunak had known it was this tight, he might not have tacked so heavily to the right. And I don't know how that would have played out in the results. But that's my main takeaway is it's just interesting how much polling can frame a race, especially when it's not accurate.
And as we discussed in the live stream on Monday, the number of key, big, heavyweight politicians that jumped on board with her mid-August, kind of fairly late in the race, clearly weighing things up, they were undoubtedly swayed by those polling results. And if more of them had gone on Rishi's side, I mean, as you say, there's no guarantee where it would have gone. But
it probably would have been closer.
It would have been almost certainly closer, and it would have looked a lot less inevitable for a lot less time. On that topic then, you've mentioned the kind of reaction from the Truss team and from MPs more generally. The fact it's so close and the fact that she never commanded support of MPs in the Commons, what do you think that tells us about her chances for the next couple of years?
So the Conservative Party is traditionally brutal when it comes to getting rid of leaders.
Yes.
It did take a while for them to get rid of Johnson with the Partygate scandal, but when it got to the point of no longer he had to go. But after that, they do seem to be okay at unifying behind the leader and giving them a chance to do well.
Sure.
So today, as we speak, there was an energy bill support scheme launched by Liz Truss, basically freezing the energy price cap, which we'll probably get onto later. And it does seem that most, if not all of her MPs are satisfied with the response and satisfied that this is a correct measure, etc., etc.
Sure.
So if she goes down that route, she might be able to unify the party. If she goes down small state, low tax, she might reinvigorate traditional conservatives. Whether that gets all of her party on board, we don't know, because ultimately she and Rishi had vastly different perspectives and proposals when it came to tax and the state.
Yes.
So it's about reconciling that. I still think it's too early to tell.
Okay, let's move on to the next section then. Let's discuss what she had to say immediately afterwards. She made two fairly notable speeches. Obviously, the kind of acceptance speech on Monday, and then on Tuesday, a speech outside of Number 10, kind of setting out her agenda. In both of those speeches, she took a real opportunity to praise Boris Johnson, her predecessor, and to kind of promote his legacy and to kind of promote some of his key talking points. And I think we've got a clip of that right now.
And I also want to thank our outgoing leader, my friend, Boris Johnson. Boris, you got Brexit done. You crushed Jeremy Corbyn. You rolled out the vaccine, and you stood up to Vladimir Putin. You were admired from Kiev to Carlisle.
Okay, so in that clip, you will have heard that she was really promoting some of the core things that Boris Johnson's been talking about for a long time. The key moments, the key achievements. What do you think about that? There was obviously a lot of talk during the campaign about needing a fresh start and about drawing a line under things and changes. But it seems that at least initially, Truss isn't doing that. Do you think that's a good decision, or do you think it's a weird decision? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's like it makes sense in a way, doesn't it? I mean, the polling does show that actually Boris Johnson is still more popular than both Sunak and Truss, especially with the Conservative membership. And I think Truss recognises that when she has such a slim mandate, she has to do a bit of placating the Bojo crowd if she wants to achieve that unity that Nelson was talking about. Well, the main thing I think about all the stuff is that it's interesting that the political incentives are still such that Truss is focusing on Conservative MPs and the Conservative membership, even though the election's finished and the selectorate's done with, more than the wider general public. Because if you want to win over the wider general public, the sensible thing to do here is to say, listen, this is a fresh start. I'm not Boris Johnson. I dismiss all that nonsense stuff he did earlier. But clearly, the political incentives are currently such that she still has to focus on the sort of Conservative core. And that, again, just doesn't bode well for her future electoral chances. But it's sort of what she has to do at the moment because she's still steadying the ship.
Before we get to what you've got to say on that, Nelson, Keir Starmer had some similar remarks to make in PMQs yesterday, where he said that this wasn't a change and it was the same party as previously. So let's take a look at that clip.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims to be breaking orthodoxy, but the reality is she's reheating George Osborne's failed corporation tax plans, protecting oil and gas profits and forcing working people to pay the bill. She's the fourth Tory Prime Minister in 6 years. The face at the top may change, but the story remains the same. There is nothing new about the Tory fantasy of trickle-down economics. Nothing new about this Tory Prime Minister who nodded through every single decision that got us into this mess and now says how terrible it is. And can't she see there's nothing new about a Tory Prime Minister who, when asked who pays, says it's you, the working people of Britain.
Ultimately, this is the same Conservative Party.
Sure.
It's the same Conservative Party that went into power in 2010. So I think, counter to Zach's point, that she is actually appealing to the general public, but in a more tacit fashion, in that a Conservative Prime Minister getting up on the national stage and going, the previous Prime Minister was a complete mistake, they did it completely wrong. It's rubbishing her own party. So I think she wants to start with the positives of Boris Johnson in a way to try and hold on to this part. Yes, this is a fresh start with a fresh leader, not making the same mistakes, but we have to remember where he came from and not give a talking point to Keir Starmer like the blue on blue attacks during the debates.
Well, I think your last point there, I don't necessarily agree with, because I think that actually you lend far more ammo to Keir Starmer by associating yourself with the Conservative Party of the past, and I think Starmer thinks that as well, which is why his attack line there was to try and associate with her with the Conservative Party of the past. So I don't think, it maybe you're right, but if that's true, that's not good political strategy from her. The other thing I would say is that historically, the argument you made doesn't really hold, because there's a clearly, I mean, Boris Johnson's the best example of this, there was clearly a massive political benefit to be reaped from distancing yourself from your political predecessors. And that's what Boris Johnson did very successfully. He was, especially when it came to economic issues, in stark contrast to the sort of Cameron-Osborne era. And that played really well for him. He said, I'm not the Conservative Party of old. I'm not high tax, low spend. I like big infrastructure products. I like big spending. I like sort of equality, at least regional equality, hence levelling up. You might be right, of course, and descriptively that might be what Truss is thinking, but in terms of whether or not that's a good piece of politics, it's not. And I think Truss would be better suited to basically distancing herself from Boris Johnson. And I think the reason, well, maybe you're right, maybe the reason that she isn't is because she genuinely thinks it will play well with the general public, but I think she's definitely at least cognizant of the lack of unity within the Conservative Party.
Also, to be fair, she is so linked to all of the previous Conservative governments. Besides Michael Gove, she's the longest standing cabinet member there is in the current, modern realm of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard for her to distance herself, even if she wanted to. I mean, praising Boris Johnson, who is, not as unpopular as her, but very unpopular with factions of the country, maybe isn't the best move, but equally, she can't exactly say, I have nothing to do with this, when she's been Foreign Secretary, International Trade, all of those other positions over the last number of years.
I think you're right. There's a limit to what she can do. And maybe she's just accounting for that fact and going listen, I have to work within this framework. I may as well try and sell the bits that I thought were good.
So speaking of 2024 and kind of how she appeals to the general electorate more generally, she actually said in her acceptance speech, we will deliver a great victory for the Conservatives in 2024. We're going to get on to what this kind of means for Labour and how they're feeling at this point later. But do you think that's a reasonable ambition? Do you think that she does have good prospects going into 24? Obviously, quite a long way out, but what are your initial thoughts?
I don't think, she has to say that. She can't open with, I can't wait to lose in 3 years' time.
It's going to be humiliating.
I don't, this is not a hot take, this is what everyone thinks, but I don't think her prospects are good going into 2024. It does look like the next couple of years are going to be very difficult, and sure, it's especially economically, and sure, that's in large part down to things that she can't control. But history does show that high inflation and low growth, no matter the causes, do hurt incumbent governments. Yeah. So I don't think it bodes well for her. But you never know. I mean, I think in a way, she's sort of correct to be going for a slightly more unorthodox fiscal and economic policy because she's got to do something. Yeah. And I think Sunak's particular brand of sort of managerialism in this context, you can imagine Sunak essentially just sort of like managing the decline until 2024 and everyone being like, well, this is rubbish. Yeah, sure, you're competent, but we're just slightly less poor than we would have been poorer. Yeah. So in that sense, I think that actually she has to try something. I think it's unlikely to pull off because the sort of wider global macroeconomic winds are blowing so strongly against her. But basically I don't think she'll win. She
does set out a clear plan, at least, or as clear as we've heard from her thus far in her opening speech outside number 10.
Firstly, I will get Britain working again. I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform. I will cut taxes to reward hard work and boost business-led growth and investment. I will drive reform in my mission to get the United Kingdom working, building and growing. We'll get spades in the ground to make sure people are not facing unaffordable energy bills, and we will also make sure that we are building hospitals, schools, roads and broadband. Secondly, I will deal hands-on with the energy crisis caused by Putin's war. I will take action this week to deal with energy bills and to secure our future energy supply. Thirdly, I will make sure that people can get doctor's appointments and the NHS services they need. we will put our health service on a firm footing.
It is something that I think does appeal to the vast majority of people, in that I can't think of anyone in my inner circle that hasn't suffered from problems with NHS care in recent weeks and months, be it not being able to get an appointment at your GP or dentists not having any NHS appointments and just closed off.
Yeah.
So I do think that is a salient issue that people are going to be wanting tough action on. So whether she is able to deliver on that. The Getting Britain Working one is a bit jarring, because obviously during the campaign there was leaked audio of her saying that British workers need more graft.
Yeah.
But British workers produce less per hour, and that's a combination of kind of skill and application. If you look at productivity, it's very, very different in London from the rest of the country. Essentially, it's partly a sort of mindset and attitude thing, I think. Yeah, it's working culture, basically. If you go to China, it's quite different. There's a fundamental issue of British working culture, and it's not... Essentially, if we're going to be a richer country and a more prosperous country, that needs to change, but I don't think people are that keen to change that. So I think there's a slight thing in Britain about wanting the easy answers, and I think that's my reflection on the election and what's gone before it. And the referendum, it's like we say it's all Europe that's causing us all these problems. It's migrants that are causing these problems, and actually what needs to happen is a bit more graft. And it's not a popular message.
She has to be wary that this whole sort of like Get Britain Working thing isn't too easily associated with some of her previous comments. I mean, I think the comment you're mostly referring to is a comment made in a book that she co-authored, actually with Kwasi Kwarteng, Dominic Raab, and Priti Patel, and one more Conservative MP I can't remember at the moment, called Britannia Unchained. Unchained, and in it there's a quote, something like, British workers are the most idle in the world, or something like that. I think the NHS one, obviously noble ambition, but again, the headwinds aren't good here. I mean, obviously we have massive waiting lists. I don't know what the precise numbers are, but they are enormous at the moment. They are
1 in 8 people are on a hospital waiting list in England.
So what's that, like 8 million, something like that?
6.8 million.
That's a lot of people.
7 million people. There you go. And also, you have to take into account that we are going into a winter.
Yeah.
We're also going into winter where there'll be higher than average fuel poverty. So that means more cold people, more pneumonia, that sort of thing. So again, the headwinds don't bode well for her, and you can see how all of these crises interact with one another. So she's really going to have to play whack-a-mole with them. But yes, so good stuff to aim for. And we'll see how it all pans out.
To help her achieve those plans, she's announced her new cabinet. We've got.
It would be difficult without one.
It would be difficult. It's going to be difficult regardless. Without a cabinet, it's even more difficult. So let's run through some of the notable people, and if you've got any thoughts on them, how they'll be in the role, previous jobs, that kind of thing. So let's start with the new chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how to describe him, and I'm not sure any political commentator is. If I recall correctly, The Economist have called him brainy, nerdy, and weird.
Okay.
So he is going to be a central figure in the next few weeks, especially if Truss does go ahead with the emergency budget, what she's terming fiscal event. So he's going to be quite critical. Former business secretary, and I don't think he has enough name recognition, so he'll have to make a name for himself, but he is on the right of the party. He is a very key, loyal ally to Liz Truss. In fact, they live on the same street in Greenwich, causing people to term it the Greenwich set of cabinets. So they are very close allies, and I do think that unlike some of the previous governments, and unlike especially Rishi and Johnson, that this is going to be a far more conducive number 10, number 11 relationship going forward.
I was just going to, on no one knowing how to describe Kwasi Kwarteng, there's a really good Nick Robinson interview where he opens it by going like, and some people have described you as the Black Boris. And Kwasi Kwarteng just looks at him and goes, I've never heard anyone call me that. Where have you heard that from? Have we got a moment? One moment on Kwasi
go for
Kwarteng,
it.
because I actually think Kwasi Kwarteng is quite a top-notch politician. I mean, people call him really brainy because he has a ridiculously impressive academic history. So, went to Eton. I mean, that's not impressive. You just pay for it, but sure. But then he went to Cambridge, got a double first, and I think history and classics. Went to Harvard for a bit on a Kennedy scholarship. Then as a PhD in some niche thing about 19th century coinage from Cambridge. He was basically an economic historian. He won University Challenge, which is quite impressive. There's a clip on YouTube of him.
Ben and Rory would love that. Why neither of them here today?
Yeah. And there's a little clip of him on YouTube where he buzzes and then forgets it. And he goes, buzzes, and he goes, oh, fuck, I've forgotten. So he's sort of semi-famous for that. I actually think on his sort of politics, again, he co-authored that book, Britannia Unchained, and that is essentially a sort of a right-wing, sort of libertarian, neoliberal manifesto.
Sure.
So that's where his economic politics are. He's got an interestingly subtle take on the culture wars. He's also, a year before he wrote Britannia Unchained, he wrote a book about Britain's colonial past. And if you have read the comments of any of the other cabinet members on like that sort of thing, it's all predictably sort of like weirdly boosterish about how like it was actually quite a good thing that we, made people property. But then he has a really nuanced take, I mean, it's sort of more conventional as well.
Yeah.
I actually think he'll be a really good chancellor. I think that Liz Truss's economic aspirations are massive. She has some really ambitious plans, and you need someone competent to be able to pull it off. And I think it bode well that his first intervention so far was to go to the Bank of England, I think yesterday, and describe that he basically went to all the big banks and said, listen, the independence of the Bank of England is sacrosanct. We're not going to change that, which is something that Truss has flirted with in the last of the campaign, and it did spook markets. And I think Kwarteng will do a good job of essentially maintaining market and investor confidence in the UK, which is really, really necessary, especially if you want to borrow more heavily, at least in the short term, which is something that Truss is apparently open to. So I actually think I actually sort of back Kwarteng is what I'm getting at here. I think of all the politicians that Truss could have picked, he's pretty good.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's move on to Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who we might remember from previous videos we've made and from the live streams we did. Nelson, what's happening there?
Yep, so she was a leadership contender, and if I recall correctly, she was the first one to declare herself for the leadership.
She was,
live
before
on Peston.
Johnson had even resigned. Very eager.
While still a cabinet minister, so collective responsibility out the window for her. So she was Attorney General, and she is a very controversial figure, especially because she definitely is on the right of the party, and she doesn't like woke nonsense and rights apparently. So to have an Attorney General in that position is concerning, and some people did raise concerns about her appointment as Attorney General. There were some concerns about she not having enough practicing experience. But moving on to the Home Secretary role, that's less of a concern. What's more of a concern is that she seems to be trying to out pretty. She's doubled down on the Randa policy. She's doubled down on like being tough on crime, or the quintessentially conservative talking points. She is just turned up to number 20 on the speakers.
Yeah, I think her hottest take in that respect is she did say she wants to leave the ECHR. With European Convention on Human Rights, which just for clarity's sake, nothing to do with the EU.
It's the Council of Europe, which was started in 1950.
Yeah, it's a post-war thing, just about protecting
Winston
human
Churchill.
rights. Shouldn't be particularly controversial. But yeah, it will be interesting to see if she tries to follow through on that in the cabinet.
Well, that policy now provisionally can't happen because Liz Truss has abandoned plans to bring forward the British Bill of Rights, which would have given us the legal space in domestic law to leave the ECHR. Currently, under the Human Rights Act, together with the Good Friday Agreement, we can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a new thing having someone controversial in the Home Secretary. Like, it's in a very
Never happened
stable,
before.
popular position for a while now.
Theresa May, Priti Patel.
I mean,
Lovely people.
there's a trend, and it's an interesting one. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly.
Yeah, so formerly at the Education Department and at one point, I believe, party chairman. I'm not sure there's much to say about him.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that. He seems like a nice bloke.
Nice bloke.
Yeah, he gets a bit mouthy on Twitter. That's the only
Does
thing I
he?
really know about him. Yeah,
Yeah.
he loves a bit of Twitter sass.
But he
He from Greenwich too?
Is he?
Don't know. I'm asking. Don't know.
I I think he is actually. Good point. Yeah,
We should move to Greenwich. It sounds like they're having a lovely time.
We don't need a parliamentary press pass. Just hang out there.
Hang out in Greenwich.
In
It's a
front
nice
of Liz
place.
Truss's house.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. The only thing I can say about James Cleverly is I don't think he's done anything controversial.
Ooh, the pitch of your
Yeah,
voice
that
suggests
one,
that's not true.
Very high. Poor headphone user.
I don't think he's done anything controversial.
Well, Foreign Secretary, it's a place to do controversial things.
Yeah.
There's precedent. Okay, let's move to the next person then. Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary Therese Coffey.
Again, not enough said
Floor
about
is
her.
yours.
She was all over Twitter the other day because her ringtone is
Dr.
still
Dre,
Yeah.
yeah.
Fair play from her.
Yeah. She said she wants to tackle the ABCDs of healthcare, ambulances, backlog, care, doctors and dentistry.
I just hate when they shoehorn that like shit in, like a crap acronym. They have to have it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I would also add is the position of Deputy PM means constitutionally absolutely nothing.
Yes.
So, God forbid Liz Truss, like Boris Johnson, has to go into hospital and is no longer in a position to undertake her capacity. She can appoint Therese Coffey as her deputy, but it's not.
It's not a vice president.
Yes, it's not constitutional, but I believe in the cabinet rankings she is number 2, which is weird. Normally, you would have someone like the chancellor or the foreign secretary number 2, not a health secretary. But she is one of Liz Truss's closest allies, if not the closest ally. She was going in and out of number 10 on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Every few minutes. So
Sure.
she is. I think she's going to be the rock of Liz Truss over these next few weeks.
Okay, let's move to the last one we're going to go into a lot of detail on. Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg. Who do we need to introduce? I feel like
He's a huge name in his own right, to be
he
fair.
really is. What do we think about him having this position, though? Because previously he's held various positions, but this is an
his
interesting
biggest
one.
one.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, given he dresses like he's from the 18th century, he knows a lot about industry.
He does.
It's like,
He does look like
look-
Industrial Revolution vibes, for sure.
no, in all seriousness, when it comes to Jacob Rees-Mogg, I don't think he's ever been tested in a quote-unquote proper position. He's been leader of the House. He's been Brexit Opportunities Minister and leader of efficiency. And he went round civil service departments sticking pins and notes into people's boards.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's been tested in a department of substance yet.
Okay.
So this could be a good test for him. The only problem is his department technically covers the decarbonisation efforts in government, and he hasn't exactly been the most full-fronted supporter of net zero and reducing climate change.
It is worth saying there that there is also now going to be a separate Minister for Climate, who is Graham Stewart, who actually is a full-throated supporter of net zero. So that will be definitely more than mitigating. I think to be honest with you, the other parts of his portfolio sort of make sense. You know, business, industrial strategy. I mean, he has all MPs claim to have this, but he has some sort of business background where he was an investment banker, one of those sort of things. And maybe he'll be appropriately qualified for that. But it's at least nice to know that the climate part of his portfolio has been sort of devolved to a separate climate minister.
Sure.
Yeah.
Then we've got a few more familiar faces we're going to quickly go through. We've got
A lot of
Tugendhat,
faces, isn't there?
Badenoch and Mordaunt, all from the leadership race.
Yep.
What do we make of their positions and the fact that Rishi Sunak isn't anywhere to be seen?
Having them in the cabinet is a good move, I would say, in an attempt to unify the party.
Yeah.
This leadership contest was incredibly divisive, substantially more divisive than the one that saw Johnson into office and the one that saw Theresa May into office. So I do think it is a good move.
Yeah.
The question is whether or not these ministers use it as a platform to actually try again for the leadership. So like Kemi Badenoch, one of her main criticisms was she didn't have proper cabinet experience. After this, she will do.
She will
so
do, yeah.
That's a drawback from her pitch that's been removed. But I do genuinely think it's good to have people in the tent pissing out than out pissing in.
What do you make of it, Zach? I mean, historically, the person who comes second and the people who do best, I mean, with the exception of Johnson, who really broke precedent there, tend to get a fairly senior position, and he was already Chancellor. So historically, it wouldn't have been all that surprising to see Rishi keep that job. What do you make of the fact that he's not in the tent at all, as Nelson put it?
No, he's not in the tent.
Where's the piss going?
Where's it going? Good questions.
Where's
California?
Rishi's piss?
That could be the intro. But I think, again, it's one of those conventions that probably did serve the Conservative Party quite well in the past.
Yeah.
I think, obviously, you want one of the most important, well, at least historically, one of the most important things for party electability is for it to seem unified. And kicking Sunak and all his loyalist mates out and putting them in the back benches probably won't help that. And you can imagine, especially if Truss's particular economic policies don't pull off, she'll face some real pushback from the sort of more old school, fiscally conservative Sunak-led backbenchers.
Which is going to be difficult too, because even if her policies do deliver to some extent, just the way that the economy is going generally, it's going to get worse.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Regardless of how effective they are, she's going to be fighting against people saying, like, look, you're poorer now. And it'll be true. But it's like, it's proving the counterfactual for her is going to be virtually impossible.
No government has been elected in the midst of a financial or economic crisis in history.
2024, wait and see what happens. Another person who's missing is Nadine Dorries, who was offered to keep her job, but resigned regardless. What do we make of that? Obviously a very controversial figure and someone who may be hoping on the line to get a peerage instead.
This is so sad. Do you want to do it, Nelson? Do you want to explain why she's...
Well, she's going to get a peerage.
She's going to get a peerage.
She's going to get a peerage in Boris Johnson's resignation honours. So she will be called Dame Dorries. Dame Dorries? Lady.
I don't know. Oh.
Doesn't matter.
She'll have a title.
Yeah.
And she will go to the House of Lords and sit there and be a politician there. Jesus. What's slightly funny is the fact that she was replaced by Michelle Donnellan, who famously was Education Secretary for the duration of a TikTok. So now she's regulating it. She probably knows short form content quite well.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? It's just the sort of like the politicization and the weaponization of peerages appointments is just, it's a bit miserable, really. And it's just another one of those conventions that's just so decaying in the corner while we all just like thumbs up and carry on.
Yeah. Overall then, if we stop drilling into the individuals, what do we think of the picks? What do we think of the decisions? Is this a good lineup for Truss?
So by far and away is loyalist focused. And that I think could be a problem for Truss, because ideally around the table you want some dissenting voices. Policy in theory is made best when you have a genuine debate and a genuine conversation about things. But if it's just a cabinet of yes men, it will just be the worst policy coming out. So if there isn't resistance to some of her policies from within, this could go badly.
Zach?
Yeah, I agree. And also I just think that like if you took the average, the mean ideology of that cabinet, it's pretty far right.
Yeah.
And, whatever you think about that sort of politics, it's probably not that popular with the wider electorate, you know. Or at least it's not as popular as the sort of slightly more moderate Johnson boosterism that preceded it. I also think that in some sense this is all a symptom of the fact that for the last couple of years the Tory party has been just sort of culling more and more of its MPs, or even if they're not like kicking them out the party, just reducing them to nothing. You know, Johnson obviously did kick out quite a few over Brexit, including some sort of big beasts, and like maybe Rory Stewart's a good example there. Ken Clarke. Yeah. And Truss has obviously limited the number of her pool of possible cabinet ministers by excluding Sunak and all his mates. So we are just sort of like narrowing down the political pile further and further and further. And it's not the same as it used to be. There aren't any more. I mean, Sunak maybe is a big beast on the outside, but you can't really name many Conservative big beasts. I mean, a load of those cabinet members, people won't know who they are. No one knows who Kwasi Kwarteng is. I mean, we do obviously, but most people don't. People don't really know who James Cleverly is. No. Therese Coffey. No. None of these people. Jacob Rees-Mogg is a meme, but he's not like a serious bloke that everyone feels like is a big beast.
And most of these cabinet ministers have only been in Parliament for a matter of years.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can see with this lineup how famous right-wing comedian Joe Lycett commented at the weekend that this could be the dregs of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
That being said, though, it is, while being very loyal and very right-wing, it's also a very diverse cabinet. Nelson said it's full of yes men. I correct you, yes men and women.
That was good, dude.
That was
Thank
good.
you. If you hadn't flagged it, it would have been better, though.
Fuck,
Come
sorry.
on.
We can cut this.
But what do you make of that? Obviously, the kind of obvious diversity doesn't necessarily mean a diversity of opinion and all those other things, but is that a notable thing, would you say?
I think it is incredibly notable, and putting aside the lack of diversity in opinions, having none of the so-called great offices of state, so PM, Home, Foreign, and Chancellor, being a white man for the first time in history, is a major step.
Yeah.
The Conservative Party is now substantially more diverse than it was at the turn of the century, and yes, the diversity of opinion is a problem, but having people from all walks of life in cabinet is a good step.
Yeah.
Although, when I say all walks of life, this is also one of the most privately schooled cabinets.
Yeah, all privately educated.
Yeah,
but I think it is a good thing, and they're reaping the rewards sown by David Cameron back in 2015 with his whole A-list thing, which was this initiative.
Which is so funny when the people who are benefiting from this are also saying on Twitter and elsewhere that, like, this isn't just favoritism, this shouldn't be doing, like, identity politics stuff, and, like, denying all of that. And that's essentially, for better or worse, what David Cameron was doing back then. They're reaping the rewards of exactly the thing that they're kind of trying to besmirch. But anyway, it is definitely a very diverse pool of people, and I mean that's possibly going to hurt Labour too. The contrast there of front benches isn't necessarily going to be the best, especially considering that's something that already came up at PMQs, with Truss saying that they'd struggle to pick anyone even outside of North London, let alone of other kind of diverse backgrounds. On that point then, PMQs was this week, the first head-to-head between Starmer and Truss. What were your immediate thoughts based on that?
Far more polished,
Yes.
far more incisive and policy-based. With Johnson, it was quite a lot of bluster in his typical, like, bring it back to the fact that Keir Starmer was director of the CPS when he allowed Jimmy Savile to go free, even though that's not true.
I'll keep doing them, you keep talking.
And like continuing to turn to, we've got unemployment down to X, Y, Z. So that repetition of the lines, get Brexit done, Captain Hindsight, it was less slogan, more policy based. But I do think that Starmer is still has a learning curve to go to properly tailor himself to attacking Truss. Because attacking Truss and attacking Johnson is two completely different beasts.
Yeah.
And I do think that his skills as a lawyer, and established ones that, will come in handy. But he needs to take a leaf out of Johnson's book and be a bit more blustery and less incisive. If I recall correctly, like the first 3 or 4 questions were all on the exact same topic.
Yeah.
Which is a tactic, but it doesn't really look good when you're asking the same thing with no impact.
Yeah, and Truss was notably more policy focused in their responses, as you say, leaning less on old attack lines and actually answering the questions, which for Prime Minister's questions shouldn't be weird.
Answering it in
a political, of course,
yeah.
but like actually like attempting to respond to what was said rather than just throwing back vaccines and Brexit and whatever else. So
Boris Johnson throwing vaccines across the back.
handfuls of them. But no, I do think it was notably different, and there were people afterwards saying that Labour should be concerned following her first performance. Do you agree with that, or obviously too soon to tell? But
yeah, it's just one like analysis of PMQs is the ultimate exercise in confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Like every left-wing commentator was going like, "See, I told you she's rubbish."
Yeah.
Every right-wing one was going, "Oh, see, she's not actually as rubbish as you thought she was going to be."
Sure.
I think it's too early to tell. It's a single data point. And I think maybe she was better than expected, but then again, the expectations were absolutely rock bottom. You know. This is the sort of that mad cheese lady, and she did better than that. So, like, fair enough.
Pork market.
What's that?
Pork market.
Opening up new pork markets.
just saying pork markets at you.
Fair enough.
It's a good clip.
But yeah, I don't know. It's too early to tell. She did okay, I guess.
Are there any other notable moments from the last couple of days that you think we should be paying attention to?
I think we've done enough. I mean, we've
Yeah.
gone quite a
Done
lot.
enough.
Oh, come on,
Yeah,
mate.
no,
Pounds
you want a break?
crashing.
Do you want a break? Oh, easy. Sorry, pound crashing.
Yeah.
That is definitely cut.
No,
That
it's
was
not.
absolutely shit chat from both of us. Oh, you want a break, mate? Do you want a break? I
Nelson,
can't have
pound
this
crashing,
on-
pound
actually
crashing.
on telly. This has got to go.
It's the meta analysis.
Telly. This
as
is
well.
not telly.
Yeah, none of this will be on telly.
Go.
This might be on Jack's telly when he gets home. Just
Nelson, you got 1 minute on pound crash. Go.
pound go down 1985. That's
I
it.
think we
Ah,
cut.
we're done it, we're
We're
done
done.
So, we've got 9 core promises, ideologies, policy areas that we're going to be tracking over the next 100 days. These aren't necessarily things we expect to be done within 100 days. Some of them explicitly say they will be, but most of them probably won't. The question really is, when we get to mid-December, are these things she's actually put action into? Have we moved forward on these things, or have they fallen by the wayside? So let's quickly run through the policies. The first one was cutting taxes on day 1. We are on day 3?
Depends when you start counting.
Okay.
But yeah, day 3, no.
I mean, we're crossing off the list already.
Yeah.
What was the promise there, though, more broadly?
It was to cut taxes and specifically to reverse the national insurance contribution hike, which appears on people's pay slips as the social care and health and social care levy, which was brought in by Rishi Sunak. So she hasn't done that yet, but the energy bill stuff that we're going to come on
Sure.
to, I think is a more pressing issue.
And
So,
to be fair, I mean, on day 1,
Yeah.
you know what she means.
Yeah.
She never meant day 1, but we'll see whether that actually...
day 1 of the 4th week.
Yeah, okay. We'll see.
Yeah.
Next one then is cutting energy bills and acting immediately on that issue.
To be fair, she has. Some people have said that, immediately she should have done it on the steps of Downing Street, but I think that's
It was
asking
raining,
a
to be
bit
fair.
much. Yeah,
It's quite...
that's asking a bit much.
Don't
of
want to do it in the
energy
rain, do
Don't
you?
want to do it in the
Not
rain.
a good photo
Not a
op.
big announcement in the
No,
rain.
bills. Yeah. So doing it today, so she would have been in office for 1 full day.
Yeah.
And doing the announcement today, I think she has acted
Immediately. Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah, I think that's
and
fair.
whether or not it's enough, we'll have to wait and see. But broadly speaking, freezing it at the current point is a good move.
We got some progress so far. We'll keep an eye on it. The next one is tackling strike action within 30 days. What does she exactly mean by that, do you think?
Yep. So what she means by that is recently we've been seeing quite a few rail strikes, specifically from the RMT and the ASDEV union, but mainly RMT, with Mick Lynch, their general secretary, becoming a figure in and of himself.
Yeah.
What she wants to do here is institute what's called minimum service levels. Currently, during a strike, the trains don't need to run. A strike is a strike, and if there isn't enough people on board, there isn't enough people on board to safely run the services. So the policy she's trying to implement would ensure that there is a skeleton service. So yes, you might not get a train every 5 minutes, but at least one train, a half an hour, one train, an hour to keep everyone connected.
Okay. We'll see what she does on strikes. It continues to be a big issue, so it'll be interesting. Resolving the issue in Northern Ireland. This is a big one.
This is a big one.
And probably, to be fair, not really expected within 100 days, but we're expecting action soon because this is pressing, right?
Yes. So the EU nominally have a time limit of September the 15th for some legal action to progress to the next stage. So
that's like a week.
And it's a tight timetable, and we are already seeing Liz Truss not U-turn, but soften her words when it comes to Northern Ireland, and specifically triggering Article 16, which would have caused a massive trade war. So she hasn't resolved it, but she's not actively adding fuel to the fire at the moment.
Okay.
Only thing I'll say on that one is I think this is an interesting example of where crises interact with one another, because one of the main pressures on the current standoff over the Northern Ireland Protocol is unionist upset at the current protocol. And Northern Ireland is also particularly badly affected by the current energy crisis, because Northern Ireland actually doesn't have a price cap. Ofcom doesn't apply there. And actually, it's something like 70% of Northern Irish homes are heated by oil, which is even more inefficient. And there's, incomes are lower in Northern Ireland, levels of insulation are far lower, and obviously the Assembly isn't there, which means there'll be delays in getting out all the various help that's been announced. And if the fuel crisis gets worse in Northern Ireland, it will just exacerbate sort of pre-existing political tensions. And so you can see how if that's not sorted, you might see further unionist upset and even more pressure on the protocol in the coming months. I just think it's an interesting example of how often these apparently independent crises interact with one another to make each other worse. Polycrisis. Yeah,
Polycrisis.
Your favourite word?
My favourite word.
Speaking of another crisis, supporting Ukraine is another one of her key policies.
Yeah, so we obviously don't know what exactly she's going to do in the next few days, but her first foreign phone call was with Ukraine's president, Mr. Zelensky, so it does seem that her first foreign trip will be to Ukraine and that she will not be changing course when it came to Johnson's emphatic support of Ukraine.
Which is something she even brought up in PMQs, highlighting the fact that
yes.
herself and the Labour Party were aligned on that agenda. So she seems committed. We'll see what that actually involves. But the next one is keeping inflation under control.
Yep. So nominally, that's not her job.
Okay.
Technically, the job of keeping inflation under control is handed out to the Independent Bank of England, but
which Kwasi Kwarteng went to defend. So
really
pushing that responsibility over.
Yeah. So we are seeing the Bank of England take more and more decisive action when it comes to interest rates. It's currently 1.75%, which is the highest it's been in a long while. But something that she is also doing to tackle inflation, and I do think she didn't plan for this, is her plan for energy bills. Most people accept that it will reduce inflation in the short term, and it might even require, stop the Bank of England having to raise interest rates any further. Whether that happens, we'll have to see, though. So
I would basically just say two things about that. The first thing is that I think she was actually very much conscious of the impact her policies will have on inflation. I mean, a lot of the leadership campaign, a lot of the debate between her and Sunak was spent on them talking about the various impacts on inflation. I think that's one of the reasons she's mentioned it as one of her pledges. She's saying, listen, I'm not just, it's not that I don't care about inflation. I am cognizant of it, and I am going to try and keep it to manageable levels. The other thing I would say is that while her energy price cap will lower the headline inflation number, because obviously energy makes up a massive fraction of CPI, and having lower energy costs will bring down headline number. I think it will actually make the bank raise rates more aggressively, because the bank is not raising rates to try and bring energy prices down. The bank, because obviously it can't, that's due to stuff like Russia and Ukraine, all that sort of shenanigans. The bank is raising rates to try and limit domestic inflationary pressures. And actually, by limiting the price cap and providing more disposable income to households, you're only going to exacerbate what the bank sees as the domestic inflationary pressures, stuff like worries about wage price spirals and just about aggregate demand increasing and that sort of thing. So I think actually she's almost set herself up for a little bit of a battle with the Bank of England, because they will be worried about the impact this will have on aggregate demand, and we might see. I would expect rates to actually be hiked faster after this announcement and any further fiscal help.
We will wait and see. We'll keep an eye on it. The next one is was mentioned in her top 3 priorities on the steps of number 10, ensuring that people have better access to doctors.
Yeah, so that's not going to be something she'll be able to fix overnight, but Therese Coffey's ABCD priority.
So many letters.
If she well, technically it's ABCD.
Don't chuck an E in. Oh, I'm going home.
Going forward, that priority, if she genuinely does fix healthcare, that would be a good move.
Okay. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
Next one is kind of a necessity almost, is uniting the Conservative Party. Is there anything to say there? She needs to do it.
She's not
She's
doing
lost
it.
the job if she doesn't, but it's not off to a great start. But I don't know, 100 days, if she can rally people around Ukraine, all that kind of stuff.
You should be a strategist.
That's a strategy.
That's clever.
That's what Johnson did at the end, right?
To be fair. And it did work for months.
It worked,
Any problem, just fly after Ukraine.
Exactly. Finally then, instead of making the Conservative Party more united, making the Union more united.
she hasn't got off to a great start.
What's the thought process there, do you think? The kind of plan?
So some people call it muscular unionism, in that basically just
Sounds good.
dominate from the centre and crush the SNP and crush any semblance of Nicola Sturgeon having an independent platform. That is a bit weird, especially because I think it will actually give more ammunition to the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon. So, for instance, during the leadership campaign, Liz Truss called Sturgeon an attention seeker, and then Sturgeon hit back saying, "You're the one that asked me how to get into Vogue." So,
which is good, to be fair.
it is good, and we obviously don't know what Liz Truss has planned, but there were rumours that a so-called Scottish referendum act was going to be implemented that would have required a 50% approval rating for Scottish independence, but 50% of all registered voters, not just anyone who's bothered to turn up, which would have vastly increased the threshold, so much so that the No campaign last time only got 47% of registered voters. So the fact she's rode back from that brief threat is potentially a move towards uniting it, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think Nelson's right. Also, the other good quote was, I think she called Mark Drakeford low energy Jeremy Corbyn. Did you see that?
No.
Which I thought was actually quite a good
That
diss.
is quite, it's pretty good.
The thing is energy saving, so
I guess
True.
so, cost of living. But yeah, Nelson's right. She's clearly, well, at least her instincts push her towards this like muscular unionism thing. What's just annoying about all this debate is that, yeah, sure, it's difficult to deal with nationalist sentiment. Like, do you go for more devolution, which didn't really work in the past, or do you go for like muscular unionism and try to like slam it down? But it doesn't look like that's going to work either. The best thing to do here, I really do think, is just like be competent, just like make people think that
that's a high bar.
Yeah, but just like even moderately so, just sort of run like a semi-competent government in Westminster, and that should shift sort of the 5% of the very middle who are just like who are basically
Floating
mildly nationalist because they think the SNP is more competent than the various successive Conservative governments that you've seen. And I think basically almost the worst thing she can do is just diss Nicola Sturgeon and then diss the Scots and then have a go at the Welsh. She just needs to probably quieten down about that sort of stuff. I mean, if she wants to keep the union together, the best policy is to just quieten down about it and be competent in Westminster. Yeah.
Okay, so those are the 9 different policy areas we could keep an eye on. There's 100 days. There are something like 20-something podcasts between now and then. That's good news, right? Yeah?
Yay.
Okay, good.
Yeah, yay for you. I'm...
Yeah.
That's true.
That's okay. We'll miss you.
Muscular unionism.
But yeah, no, those are the 9 different policies we'll be tracking. We'll keep an eye on them. We will review them. We'll come back.
Should we try this ending one more time? Should we try it a bit?
Do it quicker?
No, as in like, should we try a clean ending so we can?
Oh, no, this isn't the ending.
Oh, it's not.
Not quite.
Yeah, you just interrupted this
I've
fluff
interrupted it.
speech.
Sorry. I thought you had like a thing lined up.
I kind of do.
Okay, sorry, go for it. Take it back. My bad. You start again. Sorry.
I don't even know where we're going now. Where's the cut going to be?
Oh no.
But yeah, we'll have to see how she does. I think this is kind of too early to tell on a lot of these policies. We've got some initial instincts on some of them, but there's no real direction yet because there's so much going on and so much still going on as we record. Okay, thanks so much for watching. We will be back on Tuesday to discuss how Truss's first weekend goes, and be sure to submit any questions you've got in the comments, and we will bring those up on Tuesday if they're good. And if we don't do a question and answer section, that's on you. Anyway, we will see you on Tuesday and have a nice weekend.